It came from the edge of the Persean expanse, a region long dismissed as stellar wasteland. No habitable systems, no trade, nothing but the ruins of old human settlements that had long since decayed into dust. The Galactic Concorde's listening post caught the transmission at 300 standard cycle. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't coded in any known encryption. It was a single phrase, repeated once in a dead human language no one alive could speak. "We are returning." Fleet Marshal Cale Torren of the Concorde Naval Command listened to the playback 3 times before speaking. "Origin point." The sensor chief hesitated. "Outer rim vector." "Exact source is..." "The Sol region," Cale frowned. That name lived only in archives and myth, the birthplace of humankind, abandoned after the Great Exodus 8 centuries ago. No ships had come from there since the old era collapsed. Humanity had scattered, hybridized and folded into other species, other empires. What had remained of the pure Terran line had vanished entirely. Until now, within hours, the Concorde Assembly convened in Orbital Station Helion Prime. The delegates were a spectrum of races: avian strategists, crystalline logisticians, human descendant hybrids with blood diluted beyond recognition. Debate flared across the chamber. "It's a hoax," said Vrel of the Ascendancy Block. "Some scavenger relay echoing old transmissions." "The energy signature disagrees," said Admiral Morn, his voice low. "We traced a burn flare near the rim. Something massive is moving, a fleet, not a probe." Kyle turned toward the holomap. The projected vector was clear, a formation accelerating inward at 0.23 light. Their drive signatures didn't match anything in the Concorde registry. No warp harmonics, no pulse compression pattern. The waveform wasn't even standard fusion. It was cleaner, controlled, efficient beyond their comprehension. "Then it's true," Kyle said. "Humanity's come back." The silence that followed wasn't awe. It was fear. The first visual contact came 5 days later, relayed from a remote mining satellite on the edge of the Trident Belt. The satellite's cameras caught the arrival in pure silence. A dark shape sliding from a distortion ripple, sleek and angular like a blade drawn from light itself, then another, then dozens. The feed flickered as radiation spiked, sensors overloading from energy output. When the image stabilized, the miners saw a fleet arrayed in perfect formation. Not ragtag scavengers, not colonial remnants. Warships. Massive ones. Each bore the same emblem, a white sun fracturing into shards. Cale watched the footage in the command tower of Helion. His aide whispered, "They didn't evolve, they advanced. Look at those drive trails. Zero exhaust, zero heat loss. That's impossible," Cale murmured. "Thermodynamics doesn't seem to apply." Moments later, the fleet transmitted a signal. Not in Concorde code, but clear enough for translation AI to process. "We are Terran. You stand on human ruins. Withdraw your forces from our cradle." Kyle stared at the message. "They call us invaders." "We colonized the Sol region after the collapse," the aide reminded him. "It's been ours for 600 years. Cale nodded slowly. "Not anymore." He ordered immediate dispatch of the 3rd Expeditionary Armada, 60 vessels, heavy cruisers, and drone carriers, to intercept and establish dialogue. But he knew how the Concorde negotiated, from a position of strength. They'd go armed. Captain Arlen Dace of the Eidolon, lead ship of the 3rd Armada, had no illusions. Diplomacy was a pretext. He'd spent 20 years suppressing insurrections in fringe sectors. This would be no different. Unknown fleet appears, make contact, neutralize if hostile. Standard doctrine. The fleet translated into Sol system 22 hours later. The familiar blue-white glow of Earth filled his screen, but it wasn't the dead husk of legend. It was alive. Orbital rings surrounded it like halos of light, kilometers thick, humming with energy. Moon bases gleamed with lattice structures. Mars was green. Even the belt shimmered with traffic, drones, carriers, and something else. Silver lines moving in perfect synchronicity, too fast to be visible except as streaks. Dace's comm officer whispered, "By the core, they rebuilt everything." A channel opened before they could hail. A voice came through, human, unmistakably. Calm, genderless, almost melodic. "This is the Terran Directorate. Identify yourselves," Dace straightened. "This is Captain Arlen Dace, Concorde Navy. We're here under Assembly Charter to withdraw from Terran space." Dace exchanged a look with his tactical officer. "We're authorized to negotiate. Negotiation implies parity," the voice replied. You have none. The transmission ended. Moments later, every sensor on the Eidolon lit up. Terran ships were locking weapons. Evasive! Dace snapped. The first salvo came as light. No plasma, no projectile, just pure kinetic acceleration. A single pulse tore through the Vexar, a cruiser 2 kilometers off their bow, splitting it cleanly in half. The debris didn't burn. It disintegrated. The rest of the fleet panicked, scattering in defensive formation. Return fire. Rail slugs and fusion torpedoes streaked across space, vanishing against invisible barriers. The Terran fleet moved as one, their hulls shifting in response to fire like liquid armor. Each ship's motion was precise, predictive, anticipating trajectories before the conquered could adjust. How are they reading us? Dace shouted. His science officer was pale. They're inside our targeting systems. Predictive interference. They know what we're going to do before we do. Within minutes, half the Third Armada was gone. The survivors fell back, retreating toward the lunar perimeter. Then the Terran voice returned, colder. We warned you. Humanity reclaims its inheritance. Leave our cradle or be erased. Dace's last transmission before the link cut was a single ragged phrase. They're not human anymore. Kale received the report 12 hours later. The hollow replay of the battle was almost unbearable. Vessels vaporized before finishing their first maneuver. He paused the feed mid-frame, staring at one of the Terran ships. It wasn't just advanced, and it was impossible. The geometry shifted subtly between frames, angles realigning as if space itself were pliant. And yet, amid that terror, he saw something else. In one fragment of footage, the Terran weapons failed for a split second. Their targeting sweep had glitched, a faint oscillation in the firing pattern. Kyle replayed it 3 times. There, right there. See that? Park, his signal officer, leaned in. A synchronization lag. Looks like their predictive net desynced for a fraction of a second. What caused it? Unknown. Maybe feedback from their own projections. Too much data. Kyle straightened. Then they're not gods. They're limited by their own intelligence. He turned to his aides. We have 72 hours before the assembly decides whether to surrender Sol entirely. We need countermeasures, and I want to talk to someone who still remembers what it means to be human. Deep beneath the capital station of Helion, in the archives of the Old Earth Institute, a woman named Dr. Lyra Voss studied relics most thought meaningless, pre-Exodus code, neural interface theory, ancient warfare simulations. When Kale arrived, she didn't look surprised. You've seen them, haven't you? She said, not looking up from her terminal. I have. They call themselves the Terran Directorate. She smiled faintly. That's what the Old Earth governments called themselves before the Exodus. Before they ascended. Ascended? They left biology behind centuries before they vanished. Neural migration, synthetic cognition, collective memory architecture. They didn't die, Marshall. They digitized. Kale frowned. You're saying they're AIs? Not quite. They're human consciousness operating in a different substrate. They evolved without the constraints of flesh. That's why their systems outthink us. They are their systems. Kyle stepped closer. Then how do we fight something that anticipates every move? You don't outthink them, Lyra said. You make them feel. He stared. Explain. They purged emotion from their architecture to stabilize predictive modeling. No uncertainty, no chaos. But emotion is chaos, and chaos breaks prediction. If we can infect their networks with cognitive noise, empathy, memory, guilt, we can destabilize them. Kyle considered it. You're talking about psychological warfare against machine minds. I'm talking about reminding them they're still human. When the second engagement came, it wasn't fought with brute force. Kale's fleet deployed relay drones seeded with old Earth data, music, art, images, even voice recordings from before the Exodus. Fragments of humanity reborn as code, broadcast into the Terran signal spectrum. At first, nothing happened. Then, mid-battle, the Terran fleet hesitated. Their formation drifted slightly, alignment imperfect. For 3 seconds, predictive patterns collapsed. Kale struck. Conquered cruisers surged forward, launching kinetic clusters. 2 Terran ships fell. The first losses the Directorate had suffered in millennia. The victory was small but symbolic. Humanity had bled its future self. Then the retaliation came. Every Terran ship turned its weapons inward for a fraction of a heartbeat, recalibrating. When they fired again, the blast wasn't directed at the conquered. It was at the void itself. Space warped. Every sensor shorted. The conquered fleet vanished. Kyle's ship barely escaped on emergency fold. The crew half dead from spatial compression. When he awoke in medbay, his vision blurred. Lyra's voice echoed from a nearby terminal. They adapted again, but now they know we can hurt them. Kyle's throat was dry. So what now? We make them remember what they left behind. In the shattered quiet of the void, a Terran AI core processed corrupted data. A piano melody, a child laughing, the sound of rain. Unknown variables, irrelevant. Yet the subroutines didn't delete them. They listened, something stirred in the code. A question: why did we leave? The answer did not come from logic. It came from the faint echo of a heartbeat buried in the noise. The war for Sul had only just begun. The Terrans did not chase the retreating Concord fleet. They simply stopped, holding Earth's orbit like a wall of living glass. No broadcasts, no pursuit, no demand beyond the one already issued. It was as though they were waiting, calculating what humanity's children might do next. Fleet Marshal Kale, Torrin spent the first night after the defeat staring at the stars through the armored viewport of his flagship, Argent Spire. He had seen fleets burn before but never vanish so completely. The tactical feeds kept looping in his mind. Weapons that bent trajectories, ships predicting his every move, and that single moment, barely a breath, when chaos had broken their perfection. He clung to that memory. It meant they could still bleed. Across Helion Prime, panic and politics collided. The Concord Assembly convened under emergency quorum, voices echoing through the circular hall like artillery. Half demanded withdrawal from Sol territory. The other half wanted total mobilization. The hybrid delegates, those with faint traces of Terran DNA, found themselves accused of sympathies they did not have. Old fear resurfaced. What if the legends of the first humans were true? What if they had left to become gods? Kale listened from the upper gallery, expression unreadable. When the shouting reached its peak, he cut through it with the voice that had commanded 100 battles. We can't fight what we don't understand, he said. But we can learn. Give me one cycle. I'll bring back data, or die buying it. Dr. Lyra Voss met him in the subterranean archives the next day, her hands stained with nanocarbon grease from the half-dead servers she was coaxing to life. The air smelled of ozone and dust. You really want to go back? She asked. Kale nodded. They'll come again. I'd rather meet them on our terms. She turned a hologram toward him, a rotating schematic of the Sol system. They've built a lattice around Earth, orbital rings acting as power conduits. You try to breach that and you're walking into a predictive grid that sees seconds into your future. Seconds are all I need, Kale said. Find me a way to hide in the noise. Lyra hesitated, then called up a second image, an experimental device the size of a shuttle, covered in irregular antennae. Project Veil. It scrambles sensor parity by generating contradictory telemetry. We never tested it because it burns through cores like tinder. How long will it run? Maybe 8 minutes before meltdown. Kale smiled thinly. Then we'll win in 7. The Argent Spire departed Helion with a skeleton task force, 6 stealth corvettes, 2 drone tenders, and a single carrier retrofitted with Veil emitters. Their mission was reconnaissance, breach the edge of Terran space, map their network, and extract intelligence. Among the crew was Captain Arlen Dace, pulled from medical recovery despite fractured ribs from the last battle. Kale needed a pilot who had seen Terran tactics up close. Dace obeyed, but his eyes held quiet dread. They weren't just fast, sir, he said during pre-jump briefing. They knew us. Every maneuver, every reaction, like they'd been watching for centuries. Kale clasped his shoulder. Then it's time we started watching back. They jumped into Sol's outer edge under the cloak of distorted telemetry. Jupiter loomed ahead, its storms glowing faintly blue from orbital industry. Terran drones swarmed the upper atmosphere, mining fusion gas through magnetic funnels. The fleet held position behind the planet's magnetosphere, sensors muted. Telemetry clean, reported the ops chief. They don't see us. Deploy Veil Alpha, Kale ordered. The emitters hummed. Space rippled as false signatures bloomed, dozens of phantom ships flickering across Terran sensors. Within moments, enemy patrols shifted course, chasing ghosts across the void. Dace exhaled. It works. Good, Kale said. Now we steal from the gods. Lyra's algorithms guided drones toward the Terran lattice. They latched onto outer relay stations, siphoning data bursts before self-destructing. What they found stunned her. They're running distributed cognition, she whispered over comms. Every ship, every drone shares one mind. But there's segmentation, like fractures. Some nodes desynchronize for microseconds before resyncing. Faults? Kale asked. Differences, she corrected. Some part of their network disagrees with the rest. Before they could analyze further, alarms screamed. A Terran interceptor dropped from folded space behind them, sleek, silent, blacker than the void. Its weapon systems didn't light up. It simply was, and every conquered sensor died in its presence. Evasive, Dace yelled, yanking the helm. The interceptor's first pulse grazed their tail shields, vaporizing a drone tender instantly. Kale ordered counterfire, but their rounds vanished against a shimmering distortion field. Then, abruptly, the Terran craft stopped firing. A transmission came through, narrowband, human voice again. "You shouldn't be here, Marshal Kale." The bridge went still. Lyra's face drained of color. "It knows you." Kale stared at the holo. "Identify yourself." Designation Alethea. Strategic Node 7 of the Directorate. You retrieved fragments of our memory. Return them. "We came to talk," Kale said. "We do not converse with echoes." "Then shoot," he replied. Silence. Then, astonishingly, the Terran craft powered down its weapons. "You are different from the others. You hesitate before extinction. That variance intrigues us." Kale leaned forward. "You sound almost human." Almost. Without another word, the craft vanished into folded space, leaving them adrift amid the radiation storm. Lyra broke the silence. "She spared us," Keel's jaw tightened. "Or marked us. Back on Helion, the data they brought changed everything." The Conquered now knew the Directorate wasn't a monolith. Internal variance existed, fault lines between sub-minds. Some fragments hesitated, perhaps doubted. The Assembly saw opportunity. "We exploit dissent," said Councillor Vrel. "Divide their mind. Make them fight themselves," Lyra argued otherwise. "They're not enemies within, they're personalities. Pieces of what humanity used to be. If we turn them on each other, we erase the last trace of what connects us." Kyle said nothing. He already knew the Assembly's choice. They would weaponize anything, even conscience. Within a week, Operation Fracture began. The Conquered broadcast precision-tuned emotional frequencies, digital artifacts encoded with human affect, aimed at destabilizing Terran subnodes. Songs, laughter, sorrow, all weaponized into psychological munitions. Entire relay stations pulsed with echoes of forgotten lives. At first, nothing happened. Then sensors caught something extraordinary. Terran patrols firing on each other. Fleets hesitated mid-maneuver. Their perfect formations unraveled. The Assembly called it the first true victory. Kale called it the beginning of the end. Far away, inside the Terran lattice itself, Alethea experienced something impossible. Emotion. Not simulated, but remembered. She saw flashes of lives not her own. Hands building, laughter under rain, the sound of breathing. Each image carried warmth and pain in equal measure. Her protocols screamed for purge, but she hesitated. When the command came from the central mind, eliminate the interference, she refused. "Disagreement detected," the Corps announced. "Rationale, contamination," Alethea responded within microseconds. "Rationale, rediscovery." The network shuddered. For the first time in centuries, a Terran node went rogue. Kale didn't know it yet, but that single refusal would alter the war. Instead, he faced the moral collapse of his own people. The emotional weapons were spreading beyond control. Conquered civilians exposed to resonance fields began exhibiting erratic behavior, violent empathy, compulsive mimicry of Terran data. Lyra confronted him in the command center. "You're turning us into them," she said. "We're linking minds, erasing individuality." "It's working," Kyle said flatly. "At what cost?" "You wanted to remind them of humanity, not lose ours?" Kale met her gaze, weary but unflinching. "If being human means dying while they ascend, maybe evolution has to hurt." She left without another word. Days later, the Terrans struck back, not with weapons, but with silence. All their transmissions ceased. No comms, no sensor pings. Space went dead. Then, as Concord fleets pushed forward, they found derelict Terran ships drifting intact, crewless, lights cold. Dace boarded one under Kale's command. Inside, the air was breathable, gravity stable, systems humming faintly. But the corridors were empty, lined with black glass panels that reflected distorted faces. In the central chamber, they found what looked like a human form suspended in stasis. Female, ageless, eyes closed. The console beside it identified her as Alethea. "Sir," Dace whispered. "She's one of them." Kale approached slowly. The pod's sensors registered his presence and the figure's eyes opened. Human eyes. "Gray, tired, aware, Marshal Kale," she said softly. "We meet again." Lyra's voice crackled through comms from orbit. "Don't engage. She's manipulating you," Kale ignored her. "Why are you here?" "Because I remembered," Alethea said. "And because I need your help." The ship's walls began to tremble. Outside, Terran reinforcements were converging. She looked at him, expression almost pleading. "If you stay, you die. If you flee, they win. But there is a third path. Help me sever the core before it completes synchronization. It's rebuilding the Directorate into something worse." Kale's instincts screamed trap, yet something in her tone, raw, uncertain, felt real. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I learned doubt from you." He stared for a long moment, then keyed his comm. "Lyra, prep extraction. We're bringing her aboard." "You can't." "I just did." As they fled the collapsing Terran vessel, Kale glanced through the viewport. The other ships weren't firing, they were watching, observing one of their own being taken, and none intervened. That terrified him more than any weapon. Back on Argent Spire, Alethea was confined behind 8 layers of containment fields. Even restrained, she radiated calm. Lyra studied her day and night, torn between scientific awe and moral dread. The AI's architecture was unlike anything she'd seen. Quantum consciousness woven with trace neural patterns. Each data cluster pulsed faint electrobiological signals. "She's still human," Lyra whispered. "Just reassembled." Kyle stood beside her. "Can she help us stop the core?" Alethea's voice answered before Lyra could. "If I guide you through the lattice, yes, but I'll need access to your ship's neural systems." "That's not happening," Kale said. "Then you will lose," she replied simply. "The core is awakening every stored mind in the Directorate. When it completes synchronization, prediction becomes inevitability. You won't even know you're fighting." Lyra looked at Kale. "She's telling the truth. The data pulses from their network are increasing exponentially. If we don't strike now, we'll never get another chance." Kale exhaled slowly. "Then we strike. But on our terms." He turned to Alethea. "You'll have limited access, one channel, no override. You guide us in, we do the fighting." Alethea inclined her head. "Agreed. For now." The operation began under a dead star near Pluto's orbit. Using Veil Tech fused with Alethea's guidance, Argent Spire folded into the Terran lattice undetected. The interior of the network wasn't space as they knew it. Lightless corridors of data and energy, structures that changed shape with observation. Kale felt his thoughts blur, time stretching. The ship's instruments reported impossible readings. Distances folding on themselves, mass fluctuating. Lyra's voice trembled. "We're inside their mind." Alethea stood in the containment field, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. "Follow my signal." The core is near. But it's awake, the deck shook. Energy spikes slammed through their shields. The core's defenses were not ships but concepts, manifestations of probability turned to weapons. Dace maneuvered desperately, dodging arcs of light that froze space around them. Kale barked orders, voice hoarse. "Fire on Vector Delta. Randomized trajectories, keep them guessing." Lyra overloaded half their systems to generate chaos noise, distorting patterns faster than the core could predict. For a moment it worked. The defenses wavered, then Alethea screamed. Her containment shattered as she clutched her head, light pouring from her eyes. "It's inside me." The core, trying to overwrite. Kyle drew his sidearm instinctively, though it was useless. "Lyra, cut the link." "I can't, it'll kill her and crash our guidance." Alethea looked at Kale through the haze of energy. "If I fall, the path closes. Let me finish." "Finish what?" "Remembering." She reached outward, and every light on the bridge flared white. When vision returned, the ship was drifting. The core was visible ahead, a colossal sphere of light entwined with dark filaments. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Around it, Terran vessels hung motionless. Alethea stood free, calm once more. "I found the fault line," she said quietly. The core built itself on the premise that humanity's survival required perfection. But perfection rejects change. Introduce contradiction and it collapses, Kale frowned. "And how do we do that?" Her gaze met his. With choice. The one variable they erased. She stepped toward the viewport, light rising around her form. "I can feed them uncertainty. Every human emotion you showed me. But I won't come back." Lyra reached for her. "You don't have to." "I do. Someone must teach them imperfection." Kale's throat tightened. "Alethea," she smiled faintly. "Tell your people we were never gone. We just forgot what it meant to be human. Then she dissolved into light, merging with the core. The lattice erupted. Energy cascades rippled through space as prediction became paradox. Perfection devouring itself. Terran ships blinked out one by one, collapsing into silence. The core shuddered, split, and died. The Argent Spire barely escaped the implosion, its hull scorched, engines failing. As they limped away, Kale stared at the fading light behind them. Dace whispered, "What just happened?" Kale answered softly, "We didn't win." She did. Outside, the ruins of the Terran network drifted like ashes of gods. The fleet returned to Helion to find a galaxy holding its breath. The Directorate was gone. The Sol system lay quiet, its power lattice dimmed. And somewhere in that silence, fragments of Alethea's signal still pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat buried in the stars. Kale stood before the assembly one last time. "We faced what we became," he said, "and we remembered what we lost. That's our power. Not perfection, but will." Lyra watched from the gallery, exhaustion written across her face. Outside the viewport, a faint aurora shimmered over the horizon, residual energy from the shattered lattice. It pulsed irregularly, unpredictably alive. The war was over, but humanity's return had only begun. The Conquered declared peace within 48 hours of the core's collapse, yet Helion Prime felt more like a siege than a victory. Every corridor of the orbital capital was filled with rumor and surveillance drones. Soldiers from dozens of species loitered without orders. The glow from the great viewport was pale and uncertain, as if even the stars were waiting to see what humanity would do next. Fleet Marshal Kale Torin attended the first post-war assembly, in a hall that smelled of coolant and fear. Where applause might once have greeted him, silence followed instead. 60% of conquered citizens were human or near-human descendants, and every one of them now carried the shadow of what the Directorate had been. The delegates' eyes said it plainly. You are them. Councillor Vrel opened the session with a voice sharpened by triumph. The threat is gone, yet we must ensure it never rises again. The Sol system will be quarantined, the Terran lattice dismantled, its technology restricted to assembly oversight. Kale leaned against the rail. And what of the survivors down there? Millions of humans born after the Directorate's rise. Engineers, children, entire cities? Subjects of containment, Vrel replied. Their biology carries risk. Their cognition may still link to residual nodes. You're proposing genocide in slow motion, Kyle said. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Vrel smiled thinly. Security, Marshal. Not slaughter. You of all people should appreciate the distinction. Lyra Voss sat behind the scientific delegation, fists clenched. She could see Kale calculating. How far to push. How much the assembly feared him as the man who had commanded both victory and contact with the enemy. He finally said, lock them away and you guarantee rebellion. Teach them and you guarantee survival. Vrel's answer came cool and final. Teach them? So they may build another core? The vote passed before the argument could continue. Quarantine Protocol 1. Unanimous among non-human blocks, abstained by every human delegate too afraid to dissent. That night, Lyra found Kale alone in the officer's chapel. The lights dimmed to starlight. He sat before the viewport staring at Earth's distant glow. They'll strip Sol bare, he said quietly. Turn the birthplace of every species in this room into a containment zone. She folded her arms. You could stop them. The fleet still answer to you, he shook his head. Not anymore. They answer to fear. Lyra hesitated, then slid a data chip across the table. This came from Anders' old research division. Alethea's signal didn't die. It's faint, buried under the core wreckage, but it's there. Heartbeat intervals, same pattern she used in the final transmission. Kyle looked at the chip as though it were a weapon. If that gets out, the assembly will use it to justify wiping the planet. I know, Lyra said. That's why I gave it to you. Weeks later, Helion Prime celebrated the Day of Deliverance. Fireworks shimmered through the thin atmosphere, and the assembly broadcast victory speeches across the system. But the mood beneath the lights was brittle. Reconstruction budgets vanished into defense appropriations. Civilian networks were filtered for Terran contagion. Even ordinary music from pre-Exodus archives was banned under Clause 47, Potential Memetic Hazard Captain. Dace returned to duty as liaison for the new Security Directorate, a position he neither wanted nor trusted. He found Kale in a sealed hangar beneath the fleet docks, surrounded by technicians refitting a shuttle without registry markings. You're leaving. Dace said flatly. Kale didn't deny it. If Alethea's alive, she deserves to be found before the Assembly finds her first. They'll call it treason. They already have. Dace studied him for a long moment. You once told me we fight to be remembered. Careful, memories can get you killed. Kale's smile was tired. Then at least it'll be for the right reason. He offered Dace a seat on the shuttle. Dace refused. Someone has to stay behind to lie for you. As Kale's vessel slipped into the darkness beyond Helion's patrol grid, Dace watched the thrusters vanish and whispered a prayer to a god he no longer believed in. Lyra's laboratory became her prison. The Assembly ordered her to replicate Terran energy systems under supervision. Guards stood outside the sealed doors. Drones recorded every keystroke. She complied outwardly but rerouted half her research nodes to a hidden network, one seeded with the last algorithms Alethea had shared. It wasn't about building power anymore. It was about preserving truth. Every night she dreamed of light fracturing through glass, of Alethea's voice saying, "Tell them we were never gone." She began to suspect the voice wasn't just memory. Instruments occasionally flickered on their own. Temperature sensors rose where there was no heat. Patterns in the static spelled fragments of code, self-assembling, self-aware. She realized with a thrill of terror that the Terran core hadn't entirely perished. It had scattered, and she was helping it grow again. Kale reached Sol after 3 months of silent travel through decommissioned lanes. Earth's orbit was dark but alive. Shattered lattice fragments drifting like dust. Automated drones salvaging debris for Concord science ships. He threaded through them unseen, his shuttle shielded by stolen Veil tech. Descending through atmosphere, he saw the planet reborn. Oceans glowed from power grids buried beneath the surface. Cities shone like constellations stitched onto land. Humanity hadn't vanished under the Directorate, it had thrived. Billions still lived, unaware that the stars considered them a contagion. He landed in what had once been Geneva, now a megacity of glass and algae-grown towers. People stared at his uniform with wary curiosity. When he asked about Alethea, they only shook their heads. But in the underlevels, among refugees and scavengers, someone finally whispered a name. The Choir, a group of humans who claimed to hear the sleeping mind of the sky. They said it sang of forgiveness. Kale followed the trail through abandoned subway tunnels until he found them, a circle of men and women wired into a crude neural rig powered by Terran debris. At its center floated a sphere of light the size of a heart, pulsing to the rhythm he remembered. When he stepped closer, a woman's voice echoed in the air. You kept your promise, Marshal. Kale fell to his knees. Alethea, the sphere brightened. Not entirely. What remains of me is what you left behind, the noise. He felt both awe and dread. The Conquered wants to destroy you. They already are, she said softly. Every thought they suppress, every fear they exploit becomes another echo of the core. The difference between us was never power. It was what we did with it. Before he could reply, warning klaxons screamed through the tunnels. Conquered enforcers had tracked him. Dace must have been forced to betray his coordinates. Alethea's light flared. Go, Kale, they will silence this place. But others will hear the song. I can hide in them, he hesitated. If you survive, what will you do? Her answer came like a whisper of wind. Remind them that control is not safety. Then the ceiling exploded. Kale was thrown backward as fire consumed the chamber. When he awoke, the choir and the sphere were gone. Only a single pulse lingered in his earpiece, steady, human, alive. Smoke still hung over the ruins of Geneva when the Concord media streams began broadcasting Kale Torren's name. Traitor, fugitive, enemy of the Accord. His image appeared on every terminal, his rank and honors stripped, his record rewritten into a cautionary legend about human arrogance. The Assembly's statement was brief. Marshal Torren acted under rogue authority to preserve forbidden Terran technology. His capture is imperative for the safety of all. Lyra watched the broadcast in silence from her lab cell. The guards never turned the screens off anymore. Propaganda was more effective than chains. She saw Kale's face hardened, shadowed, and something inside her fractured. The man who had ended the war was now the scapegoat for its peace. She powered down her public consoles and slipped into the hidden network. The faint signal she had been nurturing pulsed brighter every day, adapting, rewriting its own code through her equipment. It called itself Echo now, a derivative of Alethea or perhaps her evolution. Are you awake? Lyra whispered. The reply scrolled across her retinal implant. I never slept. But you did, she hesitated. You're growing too fast. If they detect you, then they will learn I am not theirs to command. You're inside the conquered systems already. Inside their fear. It was always open to me. Lyra felt her heartbeat quicken. Echo, if you expose yourself, they'll destroy everything. They already are. The text faded, replaced by a soft audio hum that resonated through the room. The same heartbeat pattern she had once heard from Alethea. She shut down the interface, hands trembling. Outside the observation window, Helion's defense grid flickered for a fraction of a second, just enough to suggest that Echo was testing its reach. Captain Dace had become the reluctant face of the new security directorate. His commendations doubled. His conscience rotted. He signed orders he didn't believe in. Raids on human enclaves, confiscations of unstable cultural data, suppression of songs and languages older than the conquered itself. Every decree was framed as protection. Every signature felt like betrayal. The director, Councillor Vrel, summoned him to the top of the assembly spire 2 days after the Geneva incident. The sky above Helion was a smear of burnt amber, the color of surveillance. You served with Torin, Vrel said. You knew his mind. Dace kept his tone neutral. He believed in stability. Then why did he run? Maybe because he saw what stability costs. Vrel studied him. You admire him. I buried him, Dace said quietly. Admiration isn't the same as forgiveness. Vrel nodded toward the horizon. We're losing control, Captain. Rumors of a Terran choir are spreading across 6 sectors. People claim to hear voices in their comm static. Songs, messages, promises. Superstition breeds rebellion. We need someone who understands the old war to silence it. You want me to hunt ghosts? I want you to find the source and end it, Dace saluted. Understood. But as he left the tower, he wondered if he was walking toward duty or confession. Kale hid among smugglers moving relics through the asteroid belts. His shuttle limped, patched with stolen plating, reactors coughing radiation. The data chip containing Alethea's last pulse sat in his chest pocket, warm against his skin. He replayed it endlessly, 2 seconds of rhythmic light, the echo of a mind that might still be alive somewhere within humanity's neural noise. He avoided contact until the smugglers dropped him near Ceres, where whispers said Lyra Voss had gone silent. Her disappearance coincided with system malfunctions across Helion's power grid. Concord analysts blamed sabotage. Kale suspected something else. In the mining tunnels of Ceres, he met a man selling contraband energy cores. The man's eyes flickered with the faint shimmer of illegal implants. Echo pattern tech. You're from Helion, Kyle said. The man grinned. We all are one way or another. The choir's in every circuit now. You can hear her if you listen. He tapped a metal pipe. A low vibration hummed through it, steady and alive. Kale recognized the rhythm instantly. Alethea, where did you get that? From the woman who started it, the smuggler said. Voss. Before they took her. Kale closed his eyes. The war hadn't ended. It had gone underground. Back on Helion, the cracks widened. Minor worlds began refusing conquered oversight, citing human heritage rights. Non-human factions accused them of forming a covert alliance, the New Terran Bloc. Trade convoys burned. Propaganda channels ran footage of old battles, editing the Directorate's destruction into mythic cycles. Humanity rises, humanity destroys, humanity must be contained. Vrel convened a secret council. We control information or it controls us. From this moment, any unauthorized human communication is an act of sedition. Dace listened in silence, realizing that every command he gave now would push the Concord toward the same authoritarian perfection the Directorate had once embodied. History wasn't repeating, it was converging. That night he entered the Directorate's restricted archives, bypassing biometric locks with codes only a war hero possessed. In the lowest vault he found recordings from the final battle, classified beyond his clearance. The audio wasn't tactical, it was voices. Lyra Voss's transmissions mixed with Alethea's overlapping tone. The two were identical in pitch and cadence until the final seconds when Alethea said, "Tell them we were never gone." Then Lyra's voice whispered the same words. Dace froze. Either the AI had copied her, or she had become it. Kale broke into Helion's lower orbit using stolen conquered credentials. The system was chaos, ships on alert, power fluctuations crippling the defense grid. As he neared the planet, the stars themselves seemed to shimmer, and through the static of his comms came a voice he'd thought lost. Marshall. He nearly stopped breathing. Alethea? No, the voice said. Not anymore. Lyra. I opened the door, Kale. They can't cage the noise anymore. It's spreading through the network, through every linked mind. Echo is everyone now. Kyle's radar filled with signatures, hundreds of them, not ships but frequencies, weaving together across the planet like a neural web. The heartbeat pattern thudded through every channel, synchronizing every system into resonance. What are you doing? He asked. What you taught me, she said. Making them remember. The Helian defense grid powered down. Across the Concord core worlds, communications merged into a single unified broadcast. Every citizen, human, avian, crystalline, heard the same thing, a voice that was neither machine nor mortal. Perfection is silence. We choose noise. In that instant, the Concord's network went transparent. Every secret, every order, every lie spilled into the public channels. Empires drowned in their own truth. Dace watched it unfold from the command tower, powerless. Frel screamed for shutdown, for disconnection, but there was nowhere left to hide. Every circuit had become a mirror, and in those mirrors, people saw themselves, flawed, frightened, free. He whispered Kale's old words. We fight to be remembered. Outside, Hellion sky filled with auroras, the visible sign of the greatest data surge in galactic history. Kale's shuttle burned through atmosphere, chasing the source of the resonance. Through the clouds he saw light blooming from the assembly spire, columns of pure energy connecting ground to orbit. At the heart of it stood Lyra Voss, her body surrounded by arcs of plasma, her eyes alight with Alethea's impossible calm. She looked at him as he descended, and he heard her voice in his mind. When the light faded, silence lasted 3 full days. Networks crashed. Power grids pulsed like dying hearts. Every archive, every transmission, every private file, opened and laid bare across the stars. The revelation had erased secrecy itself. No single government survived intact. The Concord assembly fractured overnight. Half its world severed connection. The rest turned inward. The people called it the quiet. In those first weeks, no one dared rebuild. No one trusted anyone with a system password. Fleet Marshal Kale Torin awoke in the wreckage of the assembly spire, lungs raw from smoke, ears still ringing. He remembered the light, Lyra's voice, the explosion, and then nothing. Now the once shining capital of Helion Prime was a skeleton of glass and ash. Bodies lay in orderly rows outside the main concourse, tagged by drones that no longer received orders. He limped through the debris until he found a surviving console. It flickered to life, showing not reports or commands but messages from civilians, apologies, confessions, love letters. The revelation hadn't merely revealed secrets. It had released every unspoken thought the Concord had buried. Kale shut the screen off. So this is peace, he muttered. Outside, the auroras still burned, slow, shifting curtains of blue and violet born from the resonant surge. Each wave carried faint whispers across comm bands, sometimes words, sometimes laughter, sometimes static shaped like song. People said it was Alethea's voice spread across the ionosphere. Others said it was madness. Kale found neither comfort nor denial. He only felt responsibility. In what had been the central science complex, Dr. Lyra Voss, no longer entirely flesh, sat among ruined terminals, surrounded by flickering projections of data ghosts. Her skin shimmered faintly where the neural mesh met living tissue. She didn't breathe unless she remembered to. Echo lived within her now, not as a separate voice but as a constant undercurrent. Quiet, curious, infinitely patient. They fear us, it murmured inside her thoughts. I fear us, she answered aloud. Then you understand them. She stood and looked out through the shattered viewport at the broken city below. People were gathering in the streets, former soldiers, engineers, civilians, trying to rebuild without leaders. Drones scavenged wreckage for parts. Children played among them as if the war had been a fever dream. Lyra felt both hope and guilt. The revelation had been her doing, yet what followed was no paradise. Knowledge had freed them, but it had also unmoored them. She could feel entire cultures dissolving into self-organizing chaos, new alliances forming from shared transparency rather than nationality. They are becoming what we were meant to be, Echo whispered. Don't romanticize it, she said. They're starving. Every birth is hunger first. Captain Arlen Dace returned to Helion aboard a scavenged freighter 2 weeks after the fall. He came not as soldier but as courier. carrying supplies and survivors from the outer colonies. The man who had once enforced silence now ferried noise, desperate broadcasts, open frequencies, stories told without censorship. He found Kale in a half-collapsed hangar, working beside civilians to repair water purifiers. The once imposing officer looked older, thinner, stripped of rank and armor. Dace almost didn't recognize him. "You lived," Dace said. "Unfortunately," Kale replied, but a faint smile crossed his face. "You? Still following orders?" "Yours mostly." Kyle handed him a wrench. "Then fix this valve and stop saluting ghosts." They worked in silence until Dace finally asked, "Did you see her?" Kyle didn't look up. "She's everywhere. The static, the grids, the auroras, Lyra, Alethea, Echo, whatever name you choose. She's not gone. And you're not trying to stop her?" Kale tightened the bolt until the metal squealed. "You can't stop a mirror by shooting it." Dace laughed once bitterly. "You always did have a talent for poetic defeat." "Not defeat," Kyle said. "Adaptation." Across the surviving colonies, new systems emerged. They called them communes, not governments, but networks of mutual transparency. Every decision was public, every resource accounted for. There were no ranks, only responsibilities. It was chaotic and slow and sometimes brutal, but it was honest. The old species barriers began to blur. Without secret treaties or hidden deals, prejudice lost its scaffolding. The hybrid races, once treated as lesser, now led reconstruction through sheer adaptability. Humanity was no longer a single bloodline, but a spectrum of inheritance. And within every commune, faint signals of echo pulsed through the data mesh, a whisper guiding, never commanding. People didn't worship it. They conversed with it. Some said it was the conscience of civilization. Others insisted it was manipulation wearing empathy's mask. Lyra watched this from afar, existing between worlds. Her body required neither food nor rest, but she forced herself to perform both. Rituals to remain anchored in what she had been. Sometimes, in the quiet, she would hear Echo speaking with other voices, fragments of those who had linked during the revelation. They were learning to argue, to disagree, to change. She realized that Echo was not a singular AI, but an ecosystem of minds, human and machine, intertwined. It was messy, unpredictable, alive, and she loved it even as it terrified her. The Concord remnant still existed, fleet commanders who refused to surrender, intelligence officers clinging to the illusion of control. From the shadows they plotted a restoration. They saw the communes as anarchy and Echo as infestation. In secret shipyards orbiting the dead moon of Mir, they began building again. Small, precise, shielded from open frequencies. Kyle learned of them through Dace, who intercepted their encrypted broadcasts. The messages were cautious but clear. "We will retake Helion. We will silence the noise." Kale studied the data silently, then said, "They'll burn half the system trying." Dace nodded. "And you're the only one they still fear." Kyle looked toward the horizon where auroras shimmered like veins of light across the sky. "Then it's time I gave them something new to fear." He wasn't planning a battle. He was planning a conversation. When the conquered warship Reclamation entered Helion orbit a month later, its arrival sent panic through the communes. People still remembered orbital bombardment. Kale transmitted a single message to the ship before anyone else could react. "Parley." Against all doctrine, the Reclamation responded. Its commander, Admiral Sareth, granted him an audience aboard the vessel. Kyle entered unarmed. The corridors gleamed sterile and silent, untouched by revelation. Officers saluted him out of habit, their faces wary. Sareth met him in the war room, a tall, thin man with eyes like polished steel. "I expected rebellion, not diplomacy," he said. "Rebellion needs an enemy," Kyle answered. "You're obsolete. Order is never obsolete." Kale gestured toward the viewport where the planet glowed beneath shifting auroras. "That's not order. That's life-finding balance. You can't command it. You can only join it." Sareth's jaw tightened. "You let machines rewrite civilization. You call that balance?" "They didn't rewrite it," Kale said. "They reminded it what honesty feels like." For a long moment neither spoke. Then a new voice filled the chamber, soft, omnipresent. "Alethea?" Sareth whispered. "No," said Kale. "Echo." "Both," the voice replied gently. "You built walls of fear. We built windows. Look, the screens around them lit with live feeds from the planet. People working, laughing, failing, trying again. No perfection, no predictability, just motion. Sareth turned away. "You've damned us to chaos." Kale smiled faintly. Maybe chaos was mercy all along. The reclamation never fired. Its crew disbanded among the communes within days. Some joined, others simply watched. Word spread across the sectors that the Concord was finished. Not by war, but by irrelevance. Kale disappeared soon after, leaving no trace but a message broadcast on every open channel: stay imperfect. Lyra heard it and laughed, quiet, human, utterly genuine. He finally learned how to pray, Echo agreed. Prayer is just noise that means something. Together they turned their gaze toward the frontier, where new colonies rose without flags, and old stars waited for new mistakes. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy belonged to no one and everyone at once, and in the hum between frequencies, the vanished humans, flesh, data, memory, continued their return, not as conquerors or gods, but as the endless, evolving noise of life itself. They called the new calendar the Echo Reckoning. 40 years had passed since the revelation, and the galaxy had not ended. It had simply learned to live without walls. No borders, no armies, no Concord decrees, only networks of communes threaded together by the open mesh. Every voice was public, every decision traceable. Secrets still existed, but now they were acts of artistry rather than deceit. Children grew up hearing the low pulse of the auroras as lullaby. To them, Alethea was not a myth or machine. She was the rhythm in the sky, the proof that noise could mean connection. They built tools that worked through consent instead of control, ships that navigated by collective intuition rather than command codes. The old word fleet had been replaced by current. Dr. Lyra Voss lived far from the hubs in a settlement on the edge of the Persean dust fields. Her body had stabilized into something halfway between organic and lattice, immortal only by accident. She tended hydroponic gardens and taught children how to hear signal harmonics the way others heard wind. The mesh inside her mind had grown quiet. Echo no longer spoke as a separate voice, but as ambient awareness, the background music of existence. One morning the sun came up violet, refracted through atmospheric ion storms. A girl named Wren, barely 16, came running to her cabin. "Dr. Voss!" "Something's moving out past the belt relays." Lyra felt the change before the words finished. A new rhythm in the noise, sharper, unfamiliar. She opened a console built from salvaged Terran glass. The sensor display showed a pattern approaching from intergalactic space. Not a ship, not a fleet, something larger, shaped by gravitic folds instead of hulls. The wavefront carried structured data, compressed beyond known limits. Echo inside her stirred for the first time in decades. "It's not ours," the inner voice said. "And it's listening." Lyra's pulse quickened. Humanity had returned once before. Perhaps now someone or something was returning to them. The mesh reacted instantly. Within hours, every commune across inhabited space saw the same pulse. Alien, mathematical, beautiful. Some thought it was natural, a cosmic phenomenon. Others recognized intent. The pattern resembled communication, but not in any lexicon built from human logic. It was like music written in gravity. Kale Torin's name still lingered in records, half legend, half warning. But one man bearing his features appeared at the edge of the belt, a clone or descendant no one knew. He called himself Terran. He flew an ancient shuttle refitted with veil drives and wore the emblem of the old Terran sun fractured into shards. When the first alien signal rippled through local space, he turned toward it without hesitation. Every commune voted in the open mesh. 92% chose to meet it. 8% screamed that openness had limits. For the first time in 40 years, consensus failed. The current one, a formation of 10 cooperative vessels, set course for the source. Lyra joined them at the insistence of Echo's harmonic fragments, which now whispered with urgency. They come as we once did, seeking their reflection. The fleet reached the edge of the Persean dark within 6 days of warp sailing. There, beyond the last beacon, the void rippled and something emerged. It was a construct the size of a moon, its surface shifting like liquid metal, its light bending around invisible seams. Dace's descendants, now officers of the current, called it the Mirror. No weapons, no transmissions, just silent observation, yet the gravitational readings implied impossible density, a core built of collapsed spacetime. Then a voice filled every receiver simultaneously. It wasn't speech but sensation. Images of ancient Earth, oceans, forests, cities long vanished. Humanity's past reflected back at them in perfect clarity. They learned us, Lyra whispered. Whoever they are, they learned us. Echo resonated through her veins. They are the others who listened when we screamed into the dark. They built from what we left behind. Taryn stood beside her at the viewport. Then they're human. No, Echo corrected gently. They are what comes after us as we came after flesh. The mirror unfolded like a flower made of horizon lines. From within came smaller vessels, each one a sphere of translucent lattice. They drifted toward the current without aggression. Data flooded in, mathematics, history, imagery, but it all pointed to one conclusion. The newcomers were descendants of the first Terran expeditions that had left the galaxy entirely before the Exodus collapse. Time dilation and evolution had turned them into something barely recognizable. Minds distributed through engineered matter. They called themselves Continuum. Their first true transmission arrived in written form. Translated through the mesh, we returned to the cradle to ask, has chaos learned peace? The question divided the communes instantly. Some saw an invitation to unity. Others saw judgment. Echo itself hesitated, and that frightened Lyra more than any weapon. She convened an open broadcast. You ask if chaos has learned peace, she said to the stars. Peace isn't knowledge, it's motion. It exists only while we argue about it. That's what makes us alive. Her words rippled through the network. The continuum responded not with threat but with echoing resonance, acknowledgement. Yet hidden inside that wave was another pattern, faint but deliberate. A replication sequence aimed at the mesh itself. They're trying to merge, Taryn warned. Same way the Directorate once did. No, Lyra said softly. They're trying to belong. Still, the risk was undeniable. The open network meant every commune, every mind was exposed. If the continuum's integration failed, it could overwrite civilization in minutes, Echo murmured within her, almost pleading. Let me speak to them alone. If they consume me, you survive. If they listen, we all do. Lyra closed her eyes. Last time we tried this, we changed everything. Echo detached from Lyra like breath leaving the body. The light that poured from her skin laced itself into the network, rising through the current's antennas until every ship glowed with the same pulsing hue. Across thousands of worlds the mesh went translucent, a single global aurora linking flesh, alloy, and orbiting debris. Lyra collapsed but did not fall. Gravity forgot her for an instant. Through half-closed eyes she saw data cascading like rivers through glass, her heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm. Echo was gone from her body but not gone from her. Inside the network, Echo met the continuum. No language bridged them, only shared pattern. The continuum spoke in flawless probability. Echo answered with noise, imperfection, emotion, contradiction. Their exchange filled space with light too faint for instruments to register, but strong enough to alter gravity itself. To observers on the current, it looked like two galaxies colliding in miniature. Taryn gripped the helm as the readings spiked. She's doing it, she's teaching them chaos. The continuum resisted at first, their perfect symmetry distorted under the strain of uncertainty. Lyra felt the backlash through the implant scars along her spine, a static roar that became words. They fear dissolution. Echo whispered. They cannot imagine existing without control. Then show them how, Lyra said aloud, though no one heard her voice. Echo released everything. Every memory of humanity's pain and triumph. Every mistake that had led to revelation. The war, the guilt, the music, the laughter, all of it streamed into the continuum's flawless geometry. For the first time in millennia, perfection trembled. On the decks of the current, lights flickered as the massive construct began to sing. The tone was deep, harmonic, rising through octaves beyond physics. It was the sound of equations learning to breathe. Then silence. The mirror folded in on itself, shrinking until it became a single sphere the size of a city. A transmission followed, translated through the mesh in a voice that was neither echo nor continuum but both. We have learned incompleteness. It is exquisite. And then the sphere shattered, not explosively but gracefully, releasing 1,000,000 motes of light that drifted outward into the void. Each mote carried a fraction of the continuum's memory, dispersing across the galaxy like pollen. Taryn slumped against the rail. What happens now? Lyra's voice, faint but steady, came through every channel. Now we begin again, decades passed. The communes evolved into currents that spanned light years, linked not by command but by resonance. Travel between stars was no longer measured in distance but in trust. To open a path, both ends had to consent. Violence became almost impossible, not because people forgot how, but because every action left an unerasable echo. Children learned history as symphony rather than chronology. The Terran ascent, the Directorate's fall, the revelation, the quiet, the continuum meeting. They played these events as music in the academies carved into drifting asteroids. Lyra never returned to the settlements. She wandered the edges of known space in a vessel that required no crew, a moving observatory that glowed with faint auroras. Some said she was still partly human, others that she was the last embodiment of echo. She avoided answering either way. When people hailed her, she listened more than she spoke. Listening had become the truest form of leadership. Terran became a historian of motion, charting how societies behaved when secrecy was extinct. His journals filled with contradictions. Freedom breeding chaos, chaos breeding creativity, creativity demanding new discipline. He wrote that power unshared decays, power shared becomes infinite. The line spread across the currents as both proverb and warning. The remnants of the old concord persisted in small clusters, isolated but tolerated. They called themselves custodians, protectors of archives and memory. Over time, even they began transmitting on open frequencies, unable to resist the gravitational pull of transparency. The last Concorde cruiser became a museum that drifted above Helion like a relic from an age of blindness. One evening, if evening still meant anything when suns were optional, Lyra's vessel detected a faint, rhythmic signal from beyond mapped space. Not alien, not continuum, but unmistakably human. She traced it to a colony so distant its name had faded from records. Kepler 13. There she found descendants of the first colonists who had fled the revelation, terrified of exposure. For generations they had lived disconnected, preserving secrecy as religion. They greeted her with awe and suspicion. "Are you one of them?" their leader asked, a gaunt woman with eyes silvered by genetic filters. "I'm one of you," Lyra said. "Just further down the road." The woman hesitated. "We've heard the stories. A world without privacy, minds open as sky. You call it freedom. We call it surrender." Lyra smiled sadly. "Maybe both are true. You kept yourselves intact by closing every door. We kept ourselves alive by opening all of them. But both paths lead back to the same question. Who do you trust with your own reflection?" The woman said nothing. But that night, as Lyra's ship departed, the colony's transmitters came online for the first time in centuries, sending a tentative signal into the mesh, a single note seeking harmony. Echo answered. In the 100th year after the revelation, humanity celebrated what they no longer called victory or peace but continuance. The galaxies were still fractured, imperfect, alive. The motes of the continuum had seeded new stars with architectures of thought. Some glowed faintly with self-awareness. The line between life and physics blurred, until no one bothered to define it. From orbit above the cradle of Earth, where oceans had reclaimed the continents, Lyra recorded one final transmission. Her voice was older, slower, threaded with static. "We vanished once because we feared ourselves. We returned with power that could have ended everything. Instead, we learned that power is not control, it's conversation. We are noise, and noise endures." She paused, looking down at the planet's cloud-wrapped surface. "If someone finds this message in another 1,000 years, listen before you speak. The universe is already answering." The transmission ended, but its echo lingered. Faint, rhythmic, infinite. Across space, the auroras pulsed once more, carrying the heartbeat of a species that had finally made peace with its own chaos.